This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبته أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his companions, his family, and those who follow them until the end of time. So, assalamu alaikum to everybody, alhamdulillah. So, alhamdulillah, after much work, I actually found a really good translation of this, but it's like $44. It's kind of expensive. By actually my wife's, I think, middle school or elementary school teacher at an Islamic school, who's now a professor, Muhammad Falkhfuri. And Professor Falkhfuri, he's at George Washington in Washington, D.C. He's done a really good job, of translating the text. I was really happy to find it compared to some of the others that I had found. So see, maybe NYU can hook it up. I don't know if you can find the student PDF edition, but it's nice. I actually teach it in my class at Wagner. I'm teaching this book for our class on ethics and spirituality. So we continue, inshallah. We're talking again now about the third obstacle, which actually is made up of four obstacles. What Imam al-Ghazali refers to as valleys, and keep in mind, in his age, a valley was like a threat, right? If you're traveling, you came across a valley, you could be robbed, you could be eaten, right? It represents an obstacle. And the first of those was dunya. We talked about that before the break. I think unhealthy attachments to the temporary world, how if that invades our hard drive, it can cause us to be not living for ourselves, not living for the right reasons. We could be, as you will, kind of an extension of all that's negative in this temporary world. And then he moved on and he started to talk about people. That was the second obstacle, al-khalq. He said that people can keep us. Remember, the goal of the book is to establish worship. That people can keep us from worship. Number one, because they just keep us busy. They say more money, more problems, more people, sometimes more problems. If you have really big families, you know kind of what I'm talking about. Things kind of happen that you never expected, little side issues, and it begins to metastasize, and then it's takes everybody away from Eid. And the second danger of people, he said, is we'll show off for them. We will not be sincere. My teacher one time, he told me a story about this kid in Kuwait who he wanted to marry this girl. So he used to go and pray in the small mosque in front of her house to impress her father. You would see this guy praying, mashallah, he was hoping that he would see him, oh wow, look at this young man. He's really such an outstanding young man. So he was there one day. I think it's a joke. Could be true, who knows? And so he was praying, and he would act like he's really in prayer, And her father was talking to some people, and he said, "MashaAllah, unzur ila hadha ash-shab at-tayyib." Look at this really nice young man who every day he comes to jama'ah. He used to walk really kind of far from one dahiya to another, from one neighborhood to another. He said, mashallah, he comes here, he prays his sunnah. And then he was praying, this young boy, and he said, wa huwa sa'im. The kid, that while he was praying, and her dad was saying how good he was because he prays, he also said, yeah, and I'm fasting too, in salah. So that's, of course, more of a harmless, somewhat benign example. But what Imam al-Ghazali is talking about is يَرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That the people, the more that we're around people, sometimes it can lead to us worshiping them as though we should be worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeing and looking for their approval and trying to impress them with our religious accomplishments. And so he mentions two ways to deal with this. One is a tafarrud, is calculated isolation, like being alone, individually, like being alone. And then the second is al-uzla. We talked about al-uzla before. Al-uzla means like from i'tizal, to pull away from something, to be far away. So to have like, to isolate myself at times alone with Allah. As Imam Ibn Ata'Allah Skandari, he says, ادفن وجودك في أرض الخمول فما نبت مما تدفن ولم يتم نتائجه. Sayyidina Imam Ibn Ata'Allah, he says in Al-Hikam, you should bury yourself sometimes in fertile land, away from the people. فما نبت, because what's not buried will not grow, and it won't bring fruit. But Imam Ibn Ata'Allah, because he comes after Al-Ghazali, he does something smart. That is that he says like, but this is like interval moments, right? Not like you live your life this way. The Prophet ﷺ, his companions, they said, Nahana Rasul ﷺ an al-wahda. Prophet, wahda, the Prophet ﷺ forbade us to live alone. So we have to take this into consideration now that, as we said very early on, whenever we read the books of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, we have to remind ourselves of being like moderate, taking what he says and maybe filtering a little bit. He's a very unique person. So then he continues on this discussion and he says that, and as you'll recall, I said this a few weeks ago, that whenever you come across abstractions, you have to go to the books of fiqh. So like al-uzla, isolation. Yani ma ma'na al-uzla? What does it mean to be isolated? So that way I'm not going with my whims. Or any type of word, first I should see, is that word been defined by the Sharia, what we call urf al-shar'i? Like did the Sharia say what is, the meaning of salah is dua. So how do we understand what is salah? By the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, by the verses of Quran, for example. The word fasting, sawm, means to restrain. إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا. Sayyidina Maryam says, alayhi salam, I have taken a vow not to talk to people. Sawma. So the word sawm actually means to stop, to refrain. So how do we know what is the meaning of fasting? شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس. These verses that come and talk about specifically وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا, eat and drink until this time. So the Sharia now has, and this is very profound, has its own definitions for words, what we call in usul al-fiqh, urf al-shar'i, that may differ from the linguistic usage. And also this shows the universality of Islam. As Al-Razi says, Arabic is, the Quran is bigger than Arabic. The second is that we have to look at, to understand these definitions, if it is related to a legal issue or a practice and action, fiqh. That's the job of fiqh. Fiqh is the science of al-amal. Ma'rifah, hukmullah. How do I know what is the ruling of Islam on this issue? Related to ilm bil-ahkam al-shar'iyya al-amaliyya. We say fiqh is the knowledge of Sharia issues related to how I act. So uzla, for example, isolation, is an action. Tafarrud is an action. So then I look to fiqh, just like I look to Sharia, related to actions, if there hasn't a definition in the Sharia, to guide my thinking, to direct my thinking. That's the job actually of mathahib. One of the roles of Islamic law is to define things. So Sayyidina Imam al-Ghazali, in that vein, he continues and he says, نفعنا الله تعالى بعلمه في دارين آمين. And because actually al-Ghazali was a great legal scholar before he was known as, people know him as a Sufi, a Barnes and Noble, but in Azhar he's known as a faqih, then a Sufi. So he says, and also mutakallim, a scholar of creed. And I had it here, and now I always do that, subhanAllah, sorry. نعم. So he says, نفعل الله تعالى بأمه في دارين آمين. قال فإن قيل فما حكم العزلة وتفرض عن الناس. After all the things that I've talked about, now you may ask me, what's the ruling for all this? What's the fiqh? Because what does fiqh actually mean? To understand. So how do I understand? That's why sometimes translation, sometimes Islamic law. I like to say Islamic understanding of legal issues. You say Islamic law, like it's like scary. It's like going to court, man. Right? Kind of fiqh wa fahm. And actually, Al-Shirazi, Al-Ustaz, one of the great scholars of the Shafi school, he said fiqh actually means more than understanding. Fiqh means to understand something very subtle. So like in Arabic, we have some Arabs here, you don't say faqihtu anna shamsa fawqi. If you said this, people look at you like, what's wrong with you? Faqihtu annaki mawjuda. Like, I understand you're here. You would say la araft or ra'aytuk. So Sayyidina Shirazi and others, they say la, al-fiqh means to understand things that are subtle. La yafqahuna, like they don't understand. La yafqahuna haditha. Allah says about those people in the Quran, they don't understand the essence of what you're trying to communicate to them. Ma nafqahu kathira mimma taqul. They said to Sayyidina Shu'aib, we don't really understand exactly what you're saying. Here doesn't mean like general understanding. It means like the deeper level of understanding. So the hukum is getting into the essence of this issue, because the essence leads to the purpose. The purpose is ibadah, worship. So he says, فإن قيل فما الحكم العزلة وتفرض عن الناس فبين لنا حكم يرحمك الله حال طبقات الخلق فيها والحد الذي يجب منها. He said, these people that ask him, and he's saying this hypothetically, like what if someone asks me, what's the ruling for these things? And then are you able to explain to us the different type of responsibilities maybe certain people have? Like not everybody can isolate themselves. Like when COVID started, if all of the essential healthcare workers were like, you know what, we're just going to go on sabbatical, man, peace out. It's irresponsibility. Or sometimes we find people, they get this religious bug in their middle ages and they're married and they go to their spouse like, you know, I got to dip off for like a few months. Peace. Salam alaikum. I'm doing this for Allah. The heck? Who's going to pay the bills, man? So they're saying, فَبَيِّن لَنَا طَبَقَاتٍ. So explain to us like the different types of people in regards to isolating from others, and, you know, kind of being an individual without individuality. And so this is what he's going to do. He says, فَعْلَمْ رَحِمَكَ اللَّهُ وَإِيَّانَا. He said, you should know, may Allah bless you and bless me, have mercy upon us both. أَنَّ النَّاسَ فِي هَذَا الْبَابِ شَخْصًا. He said there are two types of people in this discussion now about isolation and so on and so forth. شخص لا حاجة بالخلق إليه في علم وبيان حكم. A person who people don't need them. And here he locates that person as someone of religion, like a scholar of religion. But we could say in general, someone who's not essential to the runnings of society. And the problem with this is when you say this, we think from a capitalist vein, oh, you're saying so these people have no value. No, that's what capitalism says. It's not what Islam says. Islam says they're just not essential. Doesn't mean that they're worthless. A'udhu billah. We know that the person who weeps alone with Allah, one drop, can put out all, metaphorically, the fires we see in the world today. That person's alone. So we have to also sometimes reorient how we look at what's like meritocracy. إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم والله أعلم بمن اتقى. We live in an age now where everything is driven by what people have, the power they have, and their fame. We talked about this last week. Like religion doesn't look at things like this. So he said, شخص, and I changed the translation. It says رجل, saying شخص, لا حاجة بالخلق إليه أو إليها في علم وبيان حكم فأولى بهذا الشخص التفرد عن الناس. So this is someone who can be calculative, like you don't have to be with the people all the time. Because Al-Ghazali, he sees people as a problem. Why? For the two reasons we mentioned. One, they keep us busy, get caught up in drama. Two, they may corrupt our worship. We may try to impress them. So he's like, if you're that kind of person, then like you can be calculative in the situation. Because your presence, you're not like an apex presence. People can function without you. فلا يخالطهم إلا في جمعة أو جماعة أو عيد أو حج أو مجلس علم بالسنة أو حاجة في معيشة لا بد من ذلك ولا يعرف. And so he said, like, this person doesn't need to, be a mix with the people except for Jum'ah or Salatul Jama'ah or Eid or Hajj or learning, or if that person has a skill that people need, which most people have a skill people need. So they are engaging in that situation where they're needed, where they bring benefit. And of course, it goes without saying, parents and marriage and kids are like, that's a non-discussion. That's understood that we should fulfill those responsibilities. وَعَشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Allah says to men, live mu'ashara with your wife. The word mu'ashara is from ashara. We say in Masriya, على سنجة عشرة دي, which means perfect 10. So Allah is telling us as men to be perfect 10 with our wife. That's what it means, mu'ashara, from ashara. And same thing also for us. Don't get the wrong idea. So that is understood. That we fulfill those responsibilities. Imam Ghazali doesn't think we're idiots. It's like, I don't need to say those kind of things. Those things should be understood. So like if someone has a skill that other people don't know, or they perform a skill, whether essential or otherwise, but it's going to help society, then they participate in that level. What the heck would he say about people buying likes? Like, how would Imam Ghazali frame this fetish for attention that people have now? Like that, to the point that, people will do really harmful things. I read I think in the last 2 weeks, 2 times where influencers fell off like cliffs. One fell off a bridge. And then disgusting things in the comments. What do you think people said? Did someone film it? What the heck, man? Like, the guy died. Like, you want to see that? Because there's this need for attention. It doesn't mean also go burn your social media accounts. Just, we want to be disciplined. We want to control them. But what would he say now? Like, in his age, mashallah, the population of Baghdad was probably like half the population of West Village. Like, Sheikh had no problem. Now, you can expand this to like even more sort of this constant. It's called public. We need public sanctioning for everything. The stress now put on young children and teenagers to perform is intense. So he said, for that person, that's how much they involve themselves. وَإِلَّا فَيُوَرَاعِ شَخْصَهُ. And if not, then what they should do, they should look after themselves. It doesn't mean in a individualistic way. He means in their relationship with Allah. Like, what are their responsibilities with Allah for their worship and for their family and for those, we talked about it before, the circle of influence. Not the theoretical stuff. What do I impact? I met a lot of Islamic workers who neglected their families for the ummah, and they regretted it later on in their life. I gave to the ummah, I gave to the ummah, I gave to the ummah. Then they came home and they found like people they didn't know anymore. Allah says, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Save yourself and your family from hell. قُلْ لِأَزْوَاجِكَ وَلِبَنَاتِكَ. Say to your wives and to your kids. Because that's really where the hard work is. It's easy to save a theoretical community, but it demands a lot of responsibility. As Allah says to Sayyidina Nuh about his son, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. It's not your son. You tried your best. Sayyidina Lut with his wife. Sayyidina Maryam with her family. They made fun of her. بُهْتَانًا عَظِيمًا. They lied about her. So sometimes dealing with family is the greatest test. So people, even in da'wah, the nafs will trick them to focus on things that don't even really impact them. The Shaykh, he says, لا وإلا فيراعي شخصه ومراعاته. Should look after himself and what he or she is responsible for. As the Prophet ﷺ said, كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Everyone is a shepherd, everybody has a flock. Like I remember when I was in my university days, I memorized the Quran while I was in college. So I remember during finals, like especially like 2 or 3 days before the exam, I would have this strong raghbah to start reviewing Quran. I was like, why do I want to do it now? Like I have exams. I realized it's like a trick of shaitan. Like he's trying to get me to do the lesser good. But what's the task at hand at this moment is what I should be focused on. What Sidi Ahmad Zuruqi said in Al-Qawa'id al-Tasawwuf, تقديم الأهم على المهم شأن الصادقين في كل شيء. Like to have these priorities. So like if it's time to serve my mom, I'm not going to go like hang out with the brothers and go to Tallgrass or something. Or if it's time to, support a brother and someone's like, yeah, let's go play video game. Awlawiyat. That's why I have something called fiqh al-awlawiyat, actually. The fiqh of priorities. So he said, for that person, let them focus on those things. Not worry about the other stuff. فَلَا يُخَالِطُهُمْ فِي أَمْرٍ مِنَ الْأُمُورِ الْبَتَّةِ يعني. It was a mistake in the print. And so like that person should just not like generally mix with people that they have no reason to mix with them. They shouldn't just be chilling for no reason. من دين ودنيا وجماعة وجمعة وغيرها لما يرى له في ذلك من مصلحة وفراغ. Because when a person has to make their own call, they should see what's best for them in the hereafter, in their relationship with Allah and fulfilling their responsibilities, things they have to do. فإنه لا يسعه ذلك إلا بأحد أمرين. نعم. And he said for someone that wants to like completely cut off, which is impossible, he said that could only really be possible in 2 scenarios. He's like, I'm done, I'm out, bro. I'm through with the world. Apocalyptic theology. He said, إما أن يسير إلى موضع لا يلزمه هنالك هذه الفرائض. First is that person should go somewhere where they don't have responsibilities, they don't have obligations. So that way they're not sinners. Think about what he's saying. Like if I live by the masjid, I don't go to the masjid all the time. I miss Jumu'ah. And you say like, why don't you go to Jumu'ah? Like, man, people are there so bad, man. I'm going to go to Jumu'ah. The sin is on me. So he said like the first is that person goes somewhere where they don't have these responsibilities. He's going to talk about this later on. Karu'us al-Jibari, like they go to the top of a mountain. Wabutur al-Awdiya, they go to the bottom of valleys. Now he means like al-Kaf al-Rigal, man cave. وَنَحْوِهَا ولعل هذا أحد الوجوه التي دعت العبادة إلى تلك مواضع البعيدة عن الناس. He said maybe this is one of the reasons why some of the famous people of worship, like they were known to live far away from others. But wait, we have to balance some of this. وإما أن يتيقن, here's the second, بالحقيقة أن الضرر الذي يلحقه في مخالطة الناس بسبب هذه الفروض أعظم من تركها. So the only other reason that someone could do this is if they are certain that the danger incurred by performing these obligations is such that they have to like pull away from people. The people is worse. So like I may not perform some of these obligations, like going to Jummah or something like this, because the harm that may happen to me there is worse. I'll give an example in the Maliki Madhab. For somebody who's wanted by the government, they wrote this, of course, in the time of Ahl Bayt, Rasul, they were being killed by people. So like, in that time, sometimes they wouldn't go to masajid. It was known Imam Malik, radiallahu, for some time he didn't go to the mosque because there was a lot of fitan. But this wasn't permanent. It's called Siddu Zara'iyah. It has to be temporary. They're saying in that situation, if someone knows like going to those places to perform those obligations, or maybe sometimes people, I get this a lot. Here's a more practical example. Their parents are emotionally or physically abusive. So they feel like if I keep this relationship with them, I'm going to incur more harm than if I keep my distance. This is a real issue. Sometimes when people are divorced, their interactions are so, harsh that it's harmful for them. Police get called and stuff like this, but also harm for who? For their kids. So this is where he's talking about now al-masalih wal-mafasid, like what's good, what's bad. So maybe for some people, going to these places may be more harmful than staying away from them, so stay away from them. Yes?
Did you say like COVID too?
No, this is a similar issue with COVID-19. That's why most of the majami' fiqhiyah, the fiqh councils, right? Their fatwa about Jumu'ah and other things was a well-informed fatwa. I was on two of those councils because they brought in medical professionals who are not on the political issue. Right? These are just medical people. And at that time, of course, March 2020, we in New York, we're just seeing people die. That's what we saw. We saw death. So there was a very responsible fatwa given. And then the opening of the masjid, this is where I think there was some mistakes. People thought, are these fiqh councils going to tell people, they're going to leave it to each community, because it started to become much more, even now, like localized issue. But exactly, to prevent a harm. So I say, ad-darr a'zam yuzal. If there's two harms, the greater harm is removed. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, for example, don't insult their gods, because if you insult their gods, they're going to what? Insult Allah. This is worse. So here we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protecting people from harm. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. They ask you about alcohol and gambling. Say there's a great sin and there's a benefit. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. But the sin is greater. So here we see the Sharia looks after the harm. تُرَاعِي الضَّرَرِ. So here's the same principle. It's one of the 5 axioms of Islamic law. Harm is removed. So here, the Sheikh is saying, and this is a personal issue, if performing any of these obligations is going to cause me to incur a greater harm, then abstaining, I should abstain. And you can see this opens up a big door. So a lot of this needs like an interdisciplinary approach, not just the sheikh. The sheikh or the scholar of law, Islamic law can give theory, but then it's going to be applied by physicians, social workers, educators, right? They have this leeway. And here you see the legal mind of Ghazali. He's like just slowly, not even saying anything about it. He's not like saying like, look at me, I'm a legal G. He's just like writing it. But when you read it, you're like, hey man, how does he know about this? Because that was his specialty. Rahimahullah, and kalam. He says, وَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ أَنَا بِمَكَّةَ حَرَّسَهَا اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. He said, I saw myself in Mecca, بعض المشايخ, some scholars, some teachers, المنفردين من أهل العلم. They had isolated themselves from people and from the people of knowledge. وهو لا يحضر المسجد الحرام في الجماعة. And that person would not go pray jama'ah in Masjid al-Haram. مع قربه منه وسلامة حالي. فحاورته في ذلك. This is one thing I like about him, even though I'm going to have maybe a little different opinion on this, but who am I in front of this guy? But Imam Ghazali says, like, I went to Mecca, yeah? I saw some big guys, famous people. They didn't pray in the masjid. So I went and made a Facebook post about them. Or I got on TikTok and I put them on blast. No, he says, Rahimahullahu ta'ala, fahawartu. I went and talked to them. And we were reading 2 years ago in Tandon, right? Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. And he said, like, I will go to Christians and ask them, like, why do you believe this? I go to the Jews. Why do you believe this? I go to the fire worshippers. Like, why do you believe this? So I went to the atheists. Hey, why are you like this? So it's something I appreciate about him, that he's very inquisitive, and his inquisitive nature compels him to be a person of character. He doesn't just like put people on blast. So he says, فَحَاوَرْتُهُ فِي ذَلِكَ يَوْمًا فِي حَالٍ ترددي إليه فذكر من عذره ما أشرنا إليه. So I went to this person, sort of in this kind of, I was like, what's going on with this guy? And that person mentioned to me some of the excuses that I mentioned earlier. وهو أن ما يجده من الثواب لا يفي بما يلحقه من الآثام والتبعات في خروج إلى المسجد ولقاء الناس. And that person told me, like, the sin and the challenges I face when I go there are more than the hasanat. Although, respectfully, lovingly, and God bless this person, nah, man, it's too many hasanats for praying in Masjid al-Haram. And Imam al-Ghazali is not necessarily saying this. This is not a book of fatwa. He's not saying you should do this. He's saying, ala sabili mithal. Here's the example of someone I met who did it. He doesn't say the guys, he does actually later on say, like, I don't necessarily agree with this. But the point is, he's just saying, here's an example of everything I just told you. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, Inna min al-masail jawabuha sukut. So there are some questions, like, people will ask you, the best answer is silence. Why? He said, to protect yourself from their harm. Maybe they're trying to do something to you. Maybe they will use your answer. فَأَسْحَنَ الْجَوَابِ عَدَمَ الْجَوَابِ. Don't say anything. Because you have to be smart. Allah says, خُذُوا حِذْرَكُمْ. Be careful. So he's not saying this is a correct pattern of behavior. Later on, he's going to address this. But this is what we call in writing, classic writing, عَلَى السَّبِيلِ الْمِثَالِ. Just like to give you an example of what he was just talking about. قلت أنا, did he say something sort of funny after talking about this guy he met in Mecca who doesn't pray in the masjid? He says, قلت أنا وجملة الأمور فلا عتبى على المعذور. He said, most things, for people who give excuses, you can't really blame them. والله أولى بالعذر وهو عليم بذات. But Allah knows people's excuses and He knows what's in their heart. Like, he's trying to say, like, yeah, whatever, man. Should go to the masjid, bro. But he says it like in a really nice way. People make excuses, khalas. But Allah knows what's really going on. ولكن طريق العدل فيه هو الأولى. But he says, but the best way is the first way, because this is the way of Islam. The Prophet said the rewards of praying in the masjid are so great. The Prophet encouraged us to go to the masajid and to observe these obligations. And maybe someone said, why did he write about this? Because this is something that was happening in his time. It may not necessarily be happening in our time. Now it happens, people are like, I feel like I'm unmosqued. I don't want to go to the mosque anymore. The more I go to the mosque, my iman goes down. People there are rude. So maybe a different situation. In his time, this was happening for other reasons. And it was a phenomenon. That he says, ولكن طريق العدل فيه هو الأول بأن يشارك الناس في الجمعة والجماعات وضروب الخيرات ويباينهم فيما سوى ذلك. نعم. He says the best thing is that you should participate in these things, because it's what Islam said to do, right? فإن أحب الطريقة الثانية فإن أحب الطريقة الثانية, if somebody wants to go about complete isolation, بأن ينقطع عن الناس بمرة فسبيله هو الخروج إلى مواضع لا تتوجه عليه هذه الفروض فيها. Then that person should go somewhere where these obligations aren't upon them, because the obligations aren't going to stop. So in that situation, the person will be a sinner. So just like they should go somewhere where they're not expected to do those things. ثم إن الطريقة الثالثة أن يكون مع ناس في مصر واحد. The other is that a person like lives in a city with people. They live in an area with, they're not isolated. This is the next thing. ولا يحضر جمعة ولا جماعة لعذر يراه في ذلك من وزر أو تبعة عليه فإنه يحتاج إلى نظر دقيق وعوارض عظيمة. He says, as for someone who doesn't want to go and live far away, then that person, if they did live in an area, a municipal area, and they chose not to do this, they need to be very careful. Like justifying, like the guy he met earlier, not participating in these things in the name of harm. He said, because in reality, that demands a very precise, informed understanding of the situation. حتى يسقط ذلك عنه, until those things that are obligated would be removed from that person. If they were in that situation, that demands a lot of insight and knowledge. وفيه خطر من الغلط, and there's like a danger that the person is going to be wrong. فالأولان أسلم وأحفظ له. So the first two that he says I mentioned, number one, just be with people, just deal with it. Or you have to go far away, live in a country, go to Oklahoma. So that's best. والله ولي الهداية بفضله. Then that takes us to the next person, and then we're going to stop after we read this really cool poem. He says, وأما الشخص الثاني فشخص يكون قدوة في العلم بحيث يحتاج الناس إليه في أمر دينهم لبيان حق أو رد على مبتدع. The second type of person is the one that people need. And he is talking here about a scholar of religion or a person of knowledge. But this could also be applied to any essential task that society relies on. So we can expand this. Because this is what he does. So he's going to speak from his own vocation. لبيان حق أو رد على مبتدع أو دعوة إلى خير بفعل أو بقول أو نحو ذلك. So somebody who their presence is a source of guidance to their actions, to their teachings, to their words, and so on and so forth. فلا يسعه هذا الرجل اعتزاله عن الناس. That person is not allowed to isolate themselves from the people. Why? Because if you kick the patient out of the hospital, you can't blame them for being sick, man. If you turn your back on the people and you have what they may need, you became a part of the problem. بل ينسب نفسه بينهم ناصحا لخلق الله تعالى ذابا عن دين الله تعالى. That person has to locate himself amongst them as a sincere advisor to them, reminding them of their prophetic responsibility, and protecting them and protecting the deen of Allah. مبينا لأحكام الله تعالى, clarifying what are the rulings of God on these issues. What does God want from us? Allah Azza wa Jal. فلقد روينا عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, and we narrate from the Prophet who said, إذا ظهرت البدع وسكت العالم فعليه لعنة الله. If heterodoxy appears amongst the people and the scholar stays quiet, then upon that scholar is the curse of God. هذا إذا كان بينهم, especially if he's like amongst them or she's amongst them. وإذا خرج من بينهم فلا يجوز له أيضا اعتزال. And even if he's not amongst them, it's not allowed for him or her, if they have this type of knowledge, to abandon the community, to distance himself from the community. فلقد حكي أن الأستاذ أبو بكر ابن فورك, ما شاء الله, هذا Imam, he died like 406 after Hijri. He wrote quite a bit of books, I think like over 100 books. قصد أن ينفرد لعبادة الله تعالى عن الخلق. He decided, like, I'm through with these freaking crazy people. His story is funny, man. He's like, I'm out of here. Get it. It's too much. I'm done. We're not to keep it real. So he kept it real. It's like, I'm out. He left. فبينما هو في بعض الجبال And he was like living in the mountains, enjoying life. سَمِعَ صَوْتٌ يُنَادِي. Then he heard a voice, said, Ya Abu Bakr, called him, O Abu Bakr. إِذَا سِرْتَ مِنْ حُجَرِ اللَّهِ عَلَى خَلْقِهِ تَرَكْتَ عِبَارَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And said to him, like, you turned away from the people. You turned away from the servants of Allah. You gave up on this responsibility. فَرَجَعَ. And then he went back. People ask him, why'd you come back? He said, this happened to me. I heard a voice telling me that I have to come back. So I came back. وَكَانَ هَذَا سَبَبْ صُحْبَتِهِ لِلْخَلْقِ. And that's, he says, the reason he came back and he mixed with the people after kind of his story. وذكر لي مأمور بن أحمد أن الأستاذ أبا إسحاق. We talked about him earlier. الشرازي. الشرازي, when you hear the word al-ustad in classic books, it means الشرازي. From Shiraz, Iran. He was a great Shafi'i Usuli. His name is al-ustad. He was known as the teacher. They say about him, he could tell you the wall is white, it's black, you believe him. Even though you look at it, he said, no. He could, like, his way of words was like very strong. And he was known for being like engrossed in worship. And he was in Lebanon. And he saw some, like, righteous people, religious people living in the mountains in Lebanon, where my wife is from, maybe the same area, who knows. And he saw them and they thought they were like, mashallah, we're out here getting down, worshiping Allah, left all the people. And he said to them, Ya akalat hashish. He said to you people who eat grass. Taraktum ummah. You left the ummah. He said, Taraktum ummata Muhammadin. You left the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, to the scholar, is an amana. The Prophet left him as an amana for that person. Even if that person, يَذْبَحَ نَفْسَهُ لِأَجْلِهِمْ, even if he were to sacrifice themselves for the ummah, خلاص, alhamdulillah. So he said, يَا أَكْلَةَ الْحَشِيشِ تركتم أمة محمد في أيدي المبتدعة واشتغلتم ها هنا بأكل الحشيش. I guess they went organic. Hashish doesn't mean what hashish means now, by the way, if you speak Arabic. Hashish means weed, a bungo in Egypt. So he said, you guys out here eating grass and you left the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam amongst the innovators and the evildoers, and you're busy with this. And they said to him, La naqwa ala sahbati nas. We can't handle it, man. It's hard, bro. It's hard to deal with these people. We don't have the ability, we don't have the capacity, the strength to deal with them. They said, Allah gave you the strength, you go and do it. فصنف بعد ذلك كتابه الجامع للجلي والخفي. After that, he wrote this book, which is like a compendium of what is clear and what is unclear. And he talked about like suhba and uzla and when you have to deal with the people and how you shouldn't like go eat grass. وكان لهم رضي الله عنهم مع غزارة العلم العمل الجم والنظر الدقيق في سلوك الطريق الآخرة. Then he says, and here we're going to talk about this and we'll finish inshallah. He says, وَعْلَمْ. This is very important for religious workers and teachers and Islamic studies folks who are teaching the Muslims, dealing with the Muslims. وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ مِثْلَ هَذَا الرَّجُلِ الْمُحْتَاجِ إِلَيْهِ النَّاسِ فِي طَرِيقِ بَابِ الدِّينِ يَحْتَاجُ فِي صُحْبَةِ الْخَلْقِ إِلَى أَمْرَيْنِ شَدِيدَيْنِ. He says, for someone who has to do this, for someone who has to be with the people, then they have to observe two really, really important, difficult things. I'm going to add a third, and feel free to add any more. أحدهما صبر طويل. They have to have a lot of resilience. They have to be resilient. وحلم عظيم. And they have to be forgiving. And hilm actually is different than forgiving. Hilm is forbearance. Like, I did you wrong and still you forgive me. That's hilm. I say, Allahumma innaka afoon, kareemun tuhibbu afwa fa'fu anna. And there's another narration, Halimun. Halim, yani the one who has the right to punish us but forgives us. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, like, that person has to have a lot of forbearance. وَنَظَرٌ لَطِيفٌ وَاسْتِعَانَةُ بِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى دَائِمًا. The first is they have to have this kind of these inner qualities. They have to be resilient. Look at Mahmoud Sami al-Barudi. He's a great poet from Egypt. He was in the government actually. And he was banished from Egypt by the British. He said, أخو العلم في الدنيا لذي الجاه محتاج وكل له عند قياس معلمه. He said, the person of knowledge, his brother in this life is the stupid person. They're twin. Like, you can't escape it. If you're smart, you're going to run into someone stupid. If you're stupid, you're going to run into someone smart. That's just how life is. So he said, فَلَوْلَا وُجُودُ الْعِلْمِ مَا عَاشَ جَاهِلُ وَلَوْلَا وُجُودُ الْجَهْلِ مَا عَاشَهَا عَالِمُ. If it wasn't for knowledge, there would be no dumb people. If it wasn't for dumb people, there would be no knowledge. There would be no scholars. So it has to be there. So that needs patience. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسِ. There's another قراءة. وَلَوْلَا دِفَاعُ اللَّهِ. قراءة سيدنا النافع المدنيين. Right? This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the balance. So look, now the lack of patience, like on issues like vaccine and some of the discussions in this country, people lack patience to talk, man. Maybe we could learn from Ghazali, who saw the guy at the Kaaba not praying. He didn't go to him and be like, man, you فاقد الضمير وعدم المخ. He went to him, he's like, why you do that? Can you, like, I just want to know, I want to learn. So he said that person who's involved in teaching people, they have to be selfless. إنما نطعمكم أي نطعم عقولكم كما نطعم بطونكم. Allah said that people, when they actually feed people in the Quran, they say, we feed you, we don't expect anything in return. The same thing if you feed in their minds. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. صعب. So he said, a lot of resilience, a lot of forbearance. They have to be super kind. And then he's like, and you better seek help with God. Like, if you're gonna amass those qualities, turn to Allah. وثاني أن يكون في هذا المعنى منفردا عنهم وإن كان بالشخص معهم. And he said, and then they sort of kind of have to live in their thoughts, because people may not be ready for it. Sayyidina Imam Zayn al-Abidin ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali, the great grandson of Sayyidina Ali, alayhim as-salam, he said in his poem, he said, لَأْتُمُ جَوَاهِرِ الْعِلْمِ أَعْلَمُ. I hid some of the jewels of knowledge that I know, because people will kill me if I say them. And he said, and this is what I took from Aba al-Hussein wal-Hasan. I took this from my grandfathers, back to Sayyidina Ali, back to Sayyidina Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he said, if I were to teach people some of the things I know, لَاسْتَحِلَّ دَمِي. They will make my blood halal and say, أَنَا أَعْبُرُ الْوَثَنَ, and I worship idols. That's the life of an alim. Look at Abu Ala al-Mu'arri, the great philosopher. He said, فَلَمَّا رَأَيْتُ الْجَهْلَ فَاشًا تَعَلَمْتُ حَتَّى يُقَالُ أَنِّي جَاهِلُ. He said, when I saw everybody was stupid, I learned until they called me stupid. You have to think about what he's saying. When I saw everybody was dumb, I learned until the dummies called me dumb. Because if the dummies are calling me dumb, what does it mean? I'm smart. So I studied until the masses, they said to me, this guy's an idiot. Then I knew, mashallah, I learned something. So that's what the Sheikh is saying now, is you have to be very careful what you teach. Sometimes when I read with different qira'at in some masajid, you should see the reaction, man. This white convert is changing Islam. It's like, how? You changed Quran. I was like, man, I ain't that important, bro. Right? Alayhimu is even Kathir Makki. It's one of the 7 qira'at. Ahlul Medina, kulhum alayhimu alayhim. So that's my fault. I should have said before I started praying, hey, I'm going to read something different. One time I was with one scholar, I read with Shu'bah and Asim. He says, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ, not وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ. After this guy came to me, he's like, mashallah, brother. You know, like, I really like what you had to say. It was really great, but I'm going to have to report you to the board. We have to ban you from giving talks here. I'm like, oh my God, like, what'd I say? He's like, yeah, you know, brother, you just don't know how to read Quran, brother. So the Sheikh, he started laughing. He said, why, Sheikh, are you laughing? He said, that guy, that's his thing, man. He's a hafiz in different qira'at. He's like, just because you don't know something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. He's like, no, he changed the Quran. Like, I swear to God, he didn't change the Quran, bro. I can show you the print, man. That's why we have a very important rule. It says, عدم المعرفة لا يفيد الوجود. Just because I don't know something doesn't mean that knowledge, that lack of knowledge exists. I ain't that special, man. So he says, sometime you just gotta keep it to yourself. فإن كلموه كلمهم. And if people talk to you, then you talk to them. وَإِنْ زَارُوهُ عَظَّمَهُمْ عَلَى قَدْرِهِمْ وَشَكَرَهُمْ. And if people visit that person, then that person should, you know, do what anyone would treat their guests. Like, they shouldn't be like, oh, I'm not isolated. Leave me alone. Sayyidina Imam al-Suyuti, who's Sunni. Well, Imam al-Shafi, and he was a mujtahid. He died 911 Hijri. Sayyidina Imam al-Suyuti, at the end of his life, he became so angry at the jealousy of his colleagues that he went and lived in a khukh. I don't know if you know what it is. A khukh is like a hut on the Nile by himself. And he was Husseini, back to Sayyidina Imam Hussein. And people would come and knock on his door. Sometimes I tell stories like this, some Shia people, they don't believe me. Some Shia brothers and sisters look at me like, what? I say, yeah, it's a true story. They would come knock on the door of Imam Suyuti, and he would say, who are you? He say, my name is William Webb. It's like, William Webb, Ibn David, Ibn Lyman, you know my whole family's name. Yeah, he's like, okay, nice. What do you want? I have a question. Ask. So he would ask behind the door. Then, subhanAllah, someone would come and say, you know, I'm such and such Sayyid. And then he would say their lineage back to Ahl Bayt Rasul, then he would let them in his house and he would treat them different. احترام لأهل بيت رسول الله. I'm not telling you to do this, just showing you, like, sometimes this divide and this fitan is unnecessary. But the point is, Asyuti, he got tired of all this, so he dipped out. Most of the great scholars that you love, they died in prison or died in isolation. Let's start. Imam Abu Hanifa is imprisoned. Sayyidina Imam Hassan, Sayyidina Imam Hussein, killed. Sayyidina Imam Malik is beaten. He doesn't die alone, but he's beaten in the Abbasi time, by the Abbasis. Imam Ahmed, everybody knows he was in jail. Imam Shafi, he had to move a lot because he was always being accused of things. Sufyan al-Thawri, he died on the run. That's why his madhab didn't last. Imam Ibn Rushd, he died in house arrest. Qari Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, he said, when I got there, I went to find him. They told me, huwa mahbus. He's in house arrest. Imam al-Tabari, everyone here, Imam al-Tabari, mashallah, a'immat al-salaf, sahib al-riwayat wal-athar. You know how he died? In house arrest. And some of the Hanabila refused to allow him to be publicly buried. Just go down the history of all the famous great imams, Imam al-Muhasibi, just read them, how they died. That in their time, people thought they were crazy. Ibn Taymiyyah, prison. In their time, people thought they were crazy. Then after they died, people were like, oh man, these guys were good. That's what happens, unfortunately. So he's saying here, and he has this experience because in his lifetime, his books were being banned and his books were being burned in Spain. So he said, أن يكون في هذا المعنى منفردا عنهم وإن كان بشخص معهم. Be with them, but don't be with them. Like, don't tell everything. Be smart. Then he talks about, but still you have to honor them and give them their rights as your Muslim and as people. وَإِنْ سَكَتُوا عَنْهُ وَأَعْرَضُوا عَنْهُ اسْتَغْنَى مَا ذَلِكَ مِنْهُم. And if they unfollow you or they leave you, he said, hey, that's a chance for you to be with God. No problem. What are you worried about? Be with Allah. وإن كانوا في حق وخير ساعدهم. And if they are in goodness and righteousness work with them. وإن صاروا إلى لغو وشر خالفهم عفوا وهجرهم. And if they're doing evil and they're involved in bad things, you should distance yourself away from them. بل رد عليهم وهجروهم إن رجاء قبولهم. And if they're doing evil, you should stay away from them and try to advise them and respond to them if that person hopes they will listen to him or her. ثم يقوم بجميع حقوقهم من الزيارات والعيادات وقضاء الحاجات التي ترفع إليه. And then also that person should fulfill all of their rights that Islam has recognized, more or less. I'm just going to summarize. Visiting them, looking after them if they're sick, not neglecting any of our social responsibilities, the social contract. ما أمكن, as best a person can. ولا يطالبهم بالمكافأة. He shouldn't expect them to pay him in return or her in return for this. ولا يرجو ذلك منهم, and have no hope in that. ولا يريهم من نفسه استحاشا لذلك ويباسطهم بالبذل إذا قدر وينقبض عنهم في الأخذ إن أعطيه ويتحمل منهم الأذى ويظهر لهم بشرى. And be patient with their they bother the person, they're going to create some trouble, be patient with it and shoulder it with a smile. It doesn't mean also allow someone's self to be ran over. I'm saying just like in general, nothing serious. وَيَتَحَمَّلُ لَهُمْ بِظَاهِرِهِ, and then outwardly show like it's all gravy. وَيَكْتُمُ حَاجَاتِهِ عَنْهُمْ, and she should not show them that he has any needs from them. فيقاسيها بنفسه ويعالجها في سره وباطنه ثم يحتاج مع ذلك أن ينظر لنفسه خاصة فيجعل لها حظا من العبادات الخالصة كما قال عمر الخطاب. He says so the person should be at their service, should be patient. I'm just going to summarize this because of time. Be patient, dealing with them internally, kind of shouldering some of the natural challenges that come with any type of, you can think about this even in activism and organizing, man. You deal with people, they're going to bother you. So you have to shoulder that with a sense of responsibility. But here he's talking about prophetic educators. Then he mentions the statement of Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, in nimtu layla. Sayyidina Umar used to say, if I sleep at night, then I have cheated my soul. I didn't pray. وَنِمْتُ نَهَارًا, and if I sleep in the daytime, then I cheat my subjects. I failed to live up to these two responsibilities. فَكَيْفَ لِي بِنَوْمٍ بَيْنَ هَاتَيْنِ, then how could I sleep knowing this? He used to say. And then Imam Ghazali, and this is where we're going to finish, he says, فَفِي هَذَا الْمَعْنَى عُرِضَ لِي أَبْيَاتٌ مِنَ الشِّعْرِ. He said, based on this statement of Umar, I was inspired to write some poetry that sort of encapsulates this second person. Remember, we started talking about the first person. They don't have these kind of responsibilities. So that's all, they can chill. But for the person that has needs that people have to have in their lives, then these are qualities they want to think about. Although he's looking at it from a religious vocation, again, that's what he does. But we can expand this to other things. So he says, فَإِن كُنْتَ فِي هَدْيِ الْأَئِمَّةِ رَاغِبًا, if you hope to be on the guidance of the early great scholars, فَوَطِّنْ عَلَى أَن تَرْكِيكَ الْوَقَائِعِ, then you have to keep your heart from being afflicted by the things that are happening around you. Don't let it be controlled. بِنَفْسٍ وَقُورٍ عِنْدَ كُلِّ كَرِيهَةٍ, with a soul that stays calm in the face of difficulties and things that we don't like. وقلب صبور وهو في الصدر مايع. يا الله. أصاب أن أترجم هذا يا سيف. He said, in that moment, your heart is at ease in these situations. And your soul is at ease and your heart has this resilience. Even though internally it may be hard on you. لسانك مخزون وطرفك ملجم. Your tongue stays silent and your eyes, you're not like getting up in people's business. وسرك مكتوم لدى الرب ذائع. And your chest stays a secret except to Allah. If those things are for Allah. وذكرك مغمور. And don't worry about it. Like, if people aren't talking about you, it's good. Like, don't worry about fame. وبابك مغلق. And your door is closed. This could have two meanings. It means like I'm not hanging out with a lot of people, but also bab here can mean the heart. That I keep this, I'm careful who I let in into that space. وثغرك بسام. And you stay smiling. وبطنك جائع. Even if inside you feel hunger. Here he's talking about the selflessness of religious workers. It's for Allah, not for the gram, dude. I had some students, they said, what's the worst thing I could do now? I said, start an Instagram account. That's for your religious stuff. If you have your personal account, whatever. But don't start like your religious vocation this way, man. It's just not healthy. It's too much sunlight. And that's not why you do this. So here he's talking about sincerity in the work. So he says, وثغرك بسام وبطنك جائع. This is the Bahr al-Tawil here in poetry. But you stay smiling even though you may be in hunger. وقلبك مجروح وسوقك كاسد. And your heart may be injured and even your business may be harmed. وفضلك مدفون. And your virtues amongst the people, they're buried. Don't worry. These people don't know who I am. Don't know about what I can do. That's narcissism, man. وفضلك مدفون الحمد لله. Don't worry about it. Don't. That's not what this is for. وطعنك شائع. And people maybe even they slander you. They write things about you. They say things about you. It comes with the process. وفي كل يوم أنت جارع غصة من الدهر والإخوان. And every day you find yourself hurt by the time and the people. والقلب طائع. But your heart stays obedient to Allah. نهارك شغل الناس من غير منة. And your days you should be busy serving people without expecting any return. وليلك شوق غاب عنه الطلائع. Ya Allah. And your nights is shawq. You have shawq, I think, in Urdu also. Shawq like longing, like ishq. You have this longing, but this longing for Allah. The longing is for Allah. غاب عنه الطلائع. And there, nobody can see you. Nobody knows what you're doing. فدونك هذا الليل خذه ذريعة. So take this night as those kind of nights, take them as like blessings and as a spoil, as a security. يوم عبوس عز فيه الذرائع. On a day where people are going to be frowning, there's going to be a lot of pain. Like take that night as your salvation. That moment of being alone with Allah. نعم يكون بنفسي معهم وبالقلب ما أبعده عنهم وذلك لعمري أمر شديد وعيش نكيد. وفيه يقول شيخنا رحمه الله تعالى في وصيته يا بني عش في أهل زمانك ولا تقتدي بهم. ثم قال ما أشد هذا العيش مع الأحياء والاقتضاء بالأموات. Ya Allah. And he said that's why some of our teachers used to say to us in giving us advice, they would say like, live with people, but don't emulate them. Emulate the righteous people. Maybe they came before you. Don't emulate the bad people around you. ثم قال ما أشد هذا العيش مع الأحياء. There's no more difficult life than where you live with the living, but you try to emulate the people who've passed away. Here he means like a salaf, a salih, righteous people. Inshallah, we're going to stop here because it's an hour now. If there's any questions or comments, alhamdulillah. And then next week, he's going to continue to build on this or next week we won't have it. The week after, we'll come back and continue. So next week we don't have class. But the next time he's going to continue the largest section of his book is dealing with people, right? Out of all the 7 obstacles, the one that has the most detail. He's dealing with people. Right? He gets into it in many ways. And he'll balance out some of the things you heard this evening, like later on. He's going to iron them out more and more and more and more and more. Any questions or comments? بارك الله فيكم وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.